Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for your patience while you waited for everything to begin. Let me introduce Seth. A number of you met him virtually at our first session, but some of you are new to this, so I will introduce Seth once again. Seth Kibel is one of the Mid-Atlantic's premier woodwind specialists, and he has been working with some of the best bands in klezmer, jazz, swing, and more. And he's been wowing audiences on clarinet, saxophone, and flute. And I think there's some other musical instruments as well in his repertoire. He is the featured performer with the Kleztet, the Bay Jazz Project, Music Pilgrim Trio, the Natty Bow, and more. He's the winner of 28 Washington area music awards, which are known as Whammys. And these have included the Best World Music Instrumentalist and the Best Jazz Instrumentalist. As Jerry said, we encourage you to put your questions in the chat box. You may find that people in the audience may even respond to your questions and you'll get your own dialogue going. But Seth and I will be keeping an eye on the chat box, as I am this very minute. And now we'll turn to Seth.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us to the second installment of the Jews of American Jazz. And if you missed the first installment, have no fear. That attendance at that is not predicated for attendance at tonight's program. Although I will say, 2 weeks ago, I was brilliant, insightful, and witty. Tonight will be a far inferior presentation. Okay, as those of you who have taken classes with me know, I always like to get things started with a little bit of music before I do anything else, just to kind of set the tone and get my juices flowing as well. So I'm going to play a song that was very much made famous by the first person we're going to talk about tonight, Mr. Stanley Gayetski, better known as Stan Getz. And this is the song that really launched the Bossa Nova craze in this country. In fact, this song was one of those rarities, a jazz song that made the pop charts in 1964. You guys probably know this very well. It's the most famous of all Brazilian Bossa Novas. This is The Girl from Washington, D.C. Okay. Welcome to tonight's installment. Last time we talked about two of the most famous Jewish American jazz musicians, both clarinetists, Benny Goodman and Arthur Arshofsky, better known as Artie Shaw. Tonight we're going to talk about some other famous American jazz musicians, one who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, saxophonist Stan Getz, and a few others that perhaps you're not as familiar with. Once again, let me just go over the ground rules for how tonight is going to work. There is surely just too many of you to allow people to unmute at will, even if everyone agreed to be completely quiet and respectful, as I'm sure you would. Just the sheer background noise from everyone's devices would create a rather unpleasant and maleficent sonic swirl. So we, and by we I mean myself and Jerry and Mindy and Victoria, are going to be merciless in keeping everyone muted. Having said that, I fully encourage everyone to avail themselves of the chat feature on Zoom. Now, I know by this point in the pandemic, everyone's a Zoom wizard. But just in case you're not, it varies to device, but you scroll your mouse, your cursor, your finger, whatever, to the top or bottom of your screen, a little menu bar pops up. Smack dab of that menu bar is a button that says chat. Click it, go over to the chat window, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. You can type any concern, comment, question, quandary, conundrum you have, hit enter, and it goes to all of us to see. Now, I won't be monitoring the chat in real time. I may not see a question as you type it, but type anything you want at any time. And at some points during the presentation, I promise I will go over there and do my best to address every pertinent comment or question contained there within. Okay, let's get started. Stanley Gayetski, Stan Getz. Just for those of you who are keeping track of dates sort of person, born February 2nd. Hey, his birthday's coming up next week. February 2nd, 1927, lived till June 6th, 1991. You know, sometimes when I do lectures about Stan Getz and I put his dates on the board or on the computer, people go, oh, what a shame. He only lived to be 64 years old. The more you learn about Stan Getz, the more you learn that the thing of wonderment is not that he lived such a short life, is that he managed to make it to 64 years old. Because Stan Getz, make no mistake about it, was an incredibly talented musician, but was a sheer train wreck of a human being. Even when he died, his closest collaborators, friends, and families eulogized him by saying, Stan Getz was a wonderful musician. I mean, how much of a terrible human being was Stan Getz? Well, he was such a train wreck of a human being that he actually caused the 1989 San Francisco earthquake. I kid you not. You see, when that earthquake struck in 1989, he was in the dugout at Candlestick Park for the World Series, preparing to go to the pitcher's mound to play the national anthem. And I firmly believe that the powers that be inflicted that earthquake upon California to prevent him from doing so. Okay, some brief biography. He is the child of Ukrainian Jewish immigrants. His father, actually, Al Gayetski, was born in London as a small child. His mom, Goldie, was from Philadelphia, and he was raised in a Jewish household. He had his bar mitzvah when he was 19, in 1940, when he was 13 years old. Now, Stan Getz's first instrument as a kid was not the saxophone. It was the bassoon. And by all accounts, he was fairly good at bassoon. I mean, so much so that he got a scholarship to play bassoon and therefore attend the All-City High School, which is now James Monroe High School in the Bronx. And he got free bassoon lessons from Simon Kovar, who is that oxymoronic type of person, a famous bassoonist. He was the principal bassoonist at the New York Philharmonic for many years. But Stan Getz's bassoon training is really significant for another reason. As many of you may know, Stan Getz had such a unique, recognizable sound on the saxophone. You know, he's one of those saxophonists that a lot of jazz fans can identify from a single note, because he has this very unique, light, feathery, airy tone. Well, a lot of that stems from his bassoon training. Let me explain, and I'm a little technical here. Let's talk about the word embouchure. Embouchure is the fancy schmancy French word for the shape of your mouth on the mouthpiece. Now, traditional saxophone embouchure, used by 98.8% of all saxophonists, I made up that number, but close to it, is what's known as single lip embouchure. Single lip embouchure means that your bottom lip curls over your bottom teeth, but your top teeth hit the mouthpiece. If I'm doing single lip embouchure correctly, which, like I said, most saxophonists and clarinetists use, my top teeth are touching the mouthpiece. My bottom teeth are under that bottom lip. Well, Stan Getz used what's known as a double lip embouchure, which comes from his bassoon playing, where he had both sets of lips curled over his teeth. Do it now. I want everyone to do it now. Curl both. Yeah. That's how he played the saxophone. Now, that's a very improper way to play the saxophone. If I had one of my students do that, they would probably be reprimanded. But that came because he was using a bassoon embouchure. Well, that double lip embouchure gave him that light, airy tone. It's hard for me to recreate it because I'm not used to it, but anyway, when he is just a preteen, he also gets a saxophone, becomes obsessed with it. He starts practicing it hours a day. He said years later, I would practice saxophone in the bathroom, and the tenements were so close together that someone across the alleyway would yell, "Shut that kid up!" And my mother would shout back, "Play louder, Stanley, play louder." Supposedly for about 2 years, he practiced 8 hours a day, and famously never really practiced again the rest of his life. He played constantly, but as far as sitting down and practicing, no, that 2 years, that's it. Well, when he's 16 years old, out of school, go on the road permanently with Jack Teagarton's big band, the famous trombonist. Jack Teagarton had heard about this talented saxophonist and needed a saxophonist for his band, and he actually goes to the Getz's apartment and talks to Stanley's father, and Stan's father agrees to let Stan drop out of school and go on the road with Jack Teagarton. Stan would talk years later about how fortuitous it was. His mother was out of town. She was visiting relatives in Philadelphia, and he said that if she had been home, she would have put her foot down, never would have let it happen. Now, Jack Teagarton wanted Stan Getz in his band for a couple of reasons. First of all, he was very talented. But another reason was the fact that Stan was 16 years old. And band leaders like Jack Teagarton were getting fed up with losing musician after musician to the draft. So finding an underage musician like Stan Getz, who could still play the part, was a huge asset. And Jack Teagarton actually legally adopted Stan Getz. not because he wanted to be an official father, but because, as you may well know, there were a lot of issues with transporting minors across state lines. So Stan's father signed the paperwork and transferred custodial responsibilities over to this legendary trombonist. Now, the other thing Stan Getz really got from Jack Teagarden, apart from his love of melody, was his great love for alcohol. Like Jack Teagarden, Stan Getz would be a lifelong alcoholic. In fact, throughout his life, he would pretty much bounce back and forth between alcohol and hard intravenous drugs. And he gets that from Jack Teagarden. Jack Teagarden is one of the most famous drunks in jazz history. It's said about Jack Teagarden that he never really got sloppy drunk, but he never in his adult life ever really was sober, that he would just kind of sip from the minute he got out of bed in the morning throughout his entire day to keep himself kind of topped off at a certain level of intoxication. All right. In 1944, Stan Getz leaves Jack Teagarden and goes out to LA to join the Stan Kenton Band. Now, when he joins the Stan Kenton Band, that's when he's introduced to heroin. And the story behind this is that he was this 18-year-old kid who drank like a fish. And the older guys of the Stan Kenton Band were very concerned about this. They thought this kid was drinking too much. So they knew about this new thing that could help you kick your drinking habit: heroin. So they introduced him to heroin with the hopes that it would help him kick his drinking habit. People weren't quite yet wise to the dangers of this drug. Stan Getz would be one of the people who would do that. All right. He floats around lots of different places, different bands, ends up becoming really famous as a soloist with the Woody Herman Orchestra. And I'm going to skip over some of those stories because this is a vignette sort of approach to his life. But he has hits like Early Autumn, Four Brothers, whatnot. And when he leaves the Woody Herman Orchestra in 1950, he's a big name in jazz. And for the first few years of the 1950s, Stan Getz's star is really on the rise. But then in 1954, one of the most infamous incidents happens in jazz history, and it concerns Stan Getz's arrest. Let me walk you through this Law and Order jazz. Stan Getz was touring with the all-star conglomeration known as Jazz at the Philharmonic. Jazz at the Philharmonic was kind of a group that would tour. It was organized by the great music business impresario Norman Granz. And it would tour the country and present kind of these all-star jam sessions in some of the leading concert halls. Well, he's on tour at Jazz at the Philharmonic. And in in LA, he is arrested for possession of heroin. Now, he's arraigned, taken before the judge. Norman Granz goes to the judge and says, "Your Honor, please, Mr. Getz has 8 more days left in this concert tour. Let him finish this concert tour, and I guarantee you I will bring him right back here before your bench." And the judge agrees. So Stan gets a brief reprieve to finish the tour. But of course, the problem now is his heroin has been confiscated. And of course, on tour in a strange city, you don't necessarily have sources. So a few days later in Seattle, Washington, Stan Getz perpetrates one of the worst, most bungled attempts at robbery in the history of grand larceny. Let me walk you through the story. Okay, so he's taking barbiturates, he's drinking, but he's going through heroin withdrawal. He's in his hotel room in Seattle. He looks out the window and sees there's a pharmacy across the street. So he goes down, he goes across the street, and he goes up. I wish I had a jacket on. He goes up to the poor lady, a woman named Mary Brewster, behind the pharmacy counter, and does this: "Give me all your morphine, and if you don't, I'll blow your brains out." Now, this pharmacy girl, Mary Brewster, she was a sharp cookie. She kind of suspected that wasn't really a gun. So she says, "I'll give it to you if you show me your gun." Stan Getz freaks out, runs out of the pharmacy back to the hotel. Now, he's very upset by this. Oh, by the way, when he does this, there's another customer in the pharmacy. So that customer goes and gets the police, but the police show up after he's already left. Okay. He goes back to his hotel room, and Stan Getz is racked with guilt that he did this. So he calls the pharmacy. And he calls the lady at the pharmacy, this woman, Mary Brewster, and he says, "I'm sorry, I just want to apologize. I was just in your pharmacy and tried to rob you." He said, supposedly, "I'm sorry for the crazy thing I did. I've never done anything like that before. I'm not a stick-up man. I'm from a good family." And this pharmacy lady, Mary Brewster, well, the police were already there because the customer had gotten them. So she tells Stan Getz, "Well, you should really talk to a doctor. I have one here. Do you want to talk to him?" And Stan says, "Yes, I'd love to talk to a doctor." So she says, "Okay, tell the doctor everything you just told me," and hands the phone to the policeman. So he spills his guts to the policeman and thinking it's a doctor. And he tells the policeman, he says, "I need drugs," thinking it's a doctor. "I need drugs. If I can't get drugs, I'm going to kill someone." All right. The doctor hangs up, starts leaving the pharmacy. Stan looks out the window, sees that there's a police officer coming out of the pharmacy. He realizes he's screwed up. So he takes his entire bottle of barbiturates and swallows it all. Okay, in a suicide attempt. The cops come to his hotel room, bust down the door, throw him in a police car. Okay, by this point, there's been quite a hubbub on the street. Enough of a hubbub that a local newspaper photographer who sold photos to the Associated Press happened to get by just in time. Uh-oh. Hold on. Oh, here we go. Oh, did I lose it? Ah! Hold on 1 second. I lost my photo. My arrest photo. I'm going to get it in just 1 second. I promise. Stan Getz arrest. Stan gets it. Where? There it is. Oh, sorry. Okay. Just in time to see this photo. All right. So the AP photographer takes this photo, sells it to the Associated Press, and this photo is plastered across every newspaper in the country. And Stan is really a victim of poor timing. You see, by 1954, the scourge of intravenous drugs, heroin and morphine, had really started to reach a fever pitch, especially in the jazz community. And it had become a hot topic of conversation in the media. Media plays have been talking about how the jazz community is ravaged by this drug addiction. And that's right when Stan gets arrested and that photo is taken. He overnight becomes the poster child for nefarious, drug-addled jazz musicians. Millions of Americans who never knew who Stan Getz was, who didn't care about jazz music, now know that he's the criminal, drug addict jazz saxophonist. He's hauled before, he actually passes out from the barbiturates right after that photo is taken. They have to perform an emergency tracheotomy in the police car, and then he's carried to a hospital. Okay, the trial gets a lot of attention. It's a big media brouhaha. The judge calls him to task and says, "You have talent, family, and a good background. But despite an income of $1,000 a week, you are not only broke, but your family is living under deplorable conditions. They are sleeping on the floor while you travel in luxury, spending money on yourself and doing what comes naturally. You are a poor excuse for a man. If you can't behave yourself, someone else is going to have to look after you. It's time you grew up." He spends 6 months in jail. When he gets out of jail, he floats around from gigs, but he becomes persona non grata in the jazz world. His career is on the skids, and his comeback is one of the most miraculous and improbable comebacks in jazz history. And it actually has to do with Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. Okay, So he's back in the United States after spending some time in Sweden, early 1960s. He goes to a friend of his, Creed Taylor, who has a record label, and says, Creed, I need a record contract. Please, I need to make records again. I'm broke. And no one wants to touch him. And Creed says, I'm sorry, Stan. I don't think I can give you a record. You know, I can't just sign you to a contract. He says, if you have something different, I'll sign you. Well, Stan puts that idea in the back of his head. Now, he's playing a relatively minor jazz club that's no longer in existence in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. And like most lower-level artists, he can't afford to have his own band, so he works with local Washington, D.C. area musicians. Well, one of those musicians who he has working with him at this club is someone who is quite a legendary figure in the world of jazz at our nation's capital, the great guitarist Charlie Byrd. Not the same as Charlie Parker, the saxophonist. This is a different Charlie Byrd, B-Y-R-D. Now, Charlie Byrd was a guitarist, played acoustic guitar, and actually played a lot of classical guitar as well. And he had recently done a tour on behalf of the State Department of South America. And when he toured South America, he got hooked on this new style of music that was taking Brazil by storm, a style of music called Bossa Nova, or Bossa Nova, for new bossa. Bossa was a traditional type of Brazilian music. Bossa Nova, or Bossa Nueva, took that traditional Brazilian music and mixed it with American jazz. Well, Charlie Byrd heard this and fell in love and brought home all these cassette tapes of Bossa Nova music. He accompanies Stan Getz at this club, and Stan Getz, as he did at this time, said, hey man, can I crash at your place tonight? So he goes back to Charlie Byrd's apartment to spend the night, and Charlie Byrd says, hey, listen to this. I want to play you some stuff. And played him some of these cassette tapes of Brazilian Bossa Nova music. Well, Stan Getz hears it and says, well, that's good stuff. That's something different. So he goes back to Creed Taylor and says, I have an idea. I want to record an album of this Brazilian Bossa Nova music. Creed Taylor says, okay, I'll spend a few bucks on it. They don't even hire a recording studio. They bring some mobile recording equipment into All Souls Unitarian Church down in Washington, D.C. One day of recording, February 13th, 1962. The resulting album is called Jazz Samba and launches the Bossa Nova craze in this country. The big hit from that album is a song called Desafinado. All right, I got to play you some music. So I'm going to play you a great clip that I love. This is a clip of Stan Getz with Charlie Byrd, the great guitarist from Washington, D.C., on the Perry Como show, playing this song, Desafinado. And I want you to listen for a couple of things. First of all, you'll hear that Bossa Nova feel, and we're all familiar with it. We all know Bossa Nova. But in 1962, this was a very new sound to most Americans. You'll hear the classical technique Charlie Byrd has on guitar. You'll hear that light, feathery tone Stanley Getz has on the saxophone. Stan Getz has on the saxophone as a result of his bassoon training. There's also some really cringeworthy banter with Perry Como. I mean, I don't want to speak ill of those who are no longer with us, but if you look up unhip in the dictionary, Perry Como's picture is right there. One thing I love is at one point in the back and forth with Perry Como, Stan Getz makes a Jewish joke that goes right over Perry Como's head. Listen for it. Perry Como asks Stan Getz, says, hey, what's the next big craze going to be? And Stan Getz says, I don't know, Bossa Nova Freilach. Freilach, of course, being a popular type of klezmer dance. And it's clear the joke goes right over Perry Como's head. All right, let me get this queued up, and we will talk about it more on the other side.
That's the South American stuff. They sent us a new jazz tempo, a new beat. They call it the Bossa Nova. Translated means new beat. The Bossa Nova has swept the Latin countries and now is being popularized by Charlie Byrd and Stan Getz on records that are selling all over the world. And that must make them very happy, because I remember how I used to feel. Nevertheless, however, here are Stan Getz on sax and Charlie Bird on guitar. beautiful, Stan. So you make records that sell all over the country, huh?
The world.
World. Want to take in a partner?
All right.
What's our next hit gonna be?
Bossa Nova Freilach.
Bossa Nova. Is that good for standard tunes?
Any old standard. You play it or you sing it, and it'll be a hit.
Yeah, where was
It's
the...
there. Whoops. So, I'm going to leave that one there. Well, look, as you well know, whenever something is a hit in the music business, whenever you have a winning formula, you stick with it. Well, Stan Getz has his big comeback playing Bossa Nova. He will spend the next decade churning out Bossa Nova after Bossa Nova after Bossa Nova album. And now they start making big money. So in 1963, his record company, now he's signed to a much bigger label, he's gotten rid of Charlie Bird and the local musicians. Now they actually decide to bring up from Brazil some of the leading Bossa Nova musicians to accompany Stan Getz in one of these follow-up records. And that album in 1963 rather, is known as Getz Gilberto. It pairs Stan Getz with two of the main figures in Brazilian Bossa Nova music. The chief composer of Brazilian Bossa Nova music, Antonio Carlos Jobim, and the chief vocalist, João Gilberto, or Gilberto, the proper pronunciation. And they record a whole album's worth of music together. Now, there's a problem, though. Stan really feels that at least some of the songs on this record should have vocals in English. You know, it'll reach more people, have wider appeal. He's a big pop star now. Now, João Gilberto, he can't really sing in English. He can barely speak English. Neither can Antonio Carlos Jobim. No one in the band can sing these songs in English. Well, lo and behold, João Gilberto's young wife, Astrud, suddenly pipes up that she can sing in English. Now, Astrud Gilberto had never sung professionally or supposedly even in any kind of semi-private setting ever before in her life. She just, at Stan's suggestion, sings a little line or two in the studio, and Stan says, I love it, let's put her on the album. Supposedly, Antonio Carlos Jobim and João Gilberto say, no, what are you, crazy? She's not a singer. She's not a professional singer. Stan said years later, Gilberto and Jobim didn't want Astrud on it. Astrud wasn't a professional singer. She was a housewife. But when I wanted translations of what was going on, she sang Ipanema and Corcovado. I thought the words in English were very nice, and Astrud sounded good enough, so he put her on the record. So, they record this album. Now, the main vocalist on the record is João Gilberto. And only on 2 songs does Astrud Gilberto sing some English translations. One of those songs being The Girl from Ipanema. Now, The Girl from Ipanema, the recording in the album is like 6 minutes long. And you've got Stan Getz playing, and you've got João Gilberto singing all these verses in Portuguese, and then there's one verse of Astrud Gilberto singing in English. Well, the record companies at this time had just started a new practice known as making radio edits, meaning taking longer songs from a record and just literally cutting and pasting the tape to make shorter versions so they'd be more radio friendly. Because pop radio stations didn't want to play, 6-minute songs. So they would come up with these radio edits, these spliced together versions that were shorter, and send those out to radio stations in the hopes of getting more airplay. Well, the record company decides to make a radio edit of Girl from Ipanema by cutting out João Gilberto completely, so that the only vocals in the song are his wife singing the English translation. Well, you all know what happens. It becomes a massive hit. One of the final pre-British invasion pop hits, reaches number 5 on the pop charts. The album goes to number 2, just behind A Hard Day's Night. It is a massive success, one of the biggest jazz hits ever. Now, I'm not going to play you the album version. I'm going to play you a version from a movie. Now, this is a movie from a 1964 film. Now, truth be told, I haven't seen the rest of this movie. But as far as I can tell from this clip, it is a very serious, intellectual, high-level art film. This clip is from a film entitled How to Get a College Girl. This is Stan Getz with Astrid Gilberto doing A Girl from Ipanema. Now, maybe some people here went to college in the 60s. I'm assuming it was exactly like this.
Tall and tan and young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema goes walking, and when she passes, each one she passes goes, When she walks, she's like a samba that swings so cool and sways so gently, that when she passes, each one she passes goes, Oh, but he watches so sadly. How can he tell her he loves her? Yes, he would give his heart gladly. But each day when she walks to the sea, she looks straight ahead, not at him. Tall and tan and young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema goes walking, and when she passes, he smiles, but she doesn't see. So sadly, how can he tell her he loves her? Yes, he would give his heart gladly, but each day when she walks to the sea, she looks straight ahead, not at him. Tall and tan and young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema goes walking, and when she passes, he smiles, but she doesn't see. She just doesn't see. No, she doesn't see. She just doesn't see.
Okay, look, lots more I could talk about with Stan Getz, but I want to get to some other folks. And let me just take a quick stroll through the group chat right now before I proceed. Okay, I'm scrolling through. Oh, I'm an excellent teacher. I like that. Oh, someone recommended the 2-CD set called People Time of Stan Getz with Kenny Barron. Just the two of them together. Kenny Barron is an incredible jazz pianist, probably one of the greatest currently living jazz pianists. And he was Stan Getz's final accompanist. And yeah, the duo recordings they made together are just incredible. Stan Getz said a lot of negative things about Stan Getz, and there's a lot of negative things to say about Stan Getz. But as a musician, as an artist, he was tremendous. And I don't want to get too much down this rabbit hole, but I think sometimes music fans have a hard time being able to separate the person from the artist. It is simultaneously possible to be a brilliant artist and a horrible human being. Look, we just had a great example of that. Also Jewish. Phil Spector, who just passed away. There is no denying that Phil Spector was an artistic genius who had a tremendous impact on 20th century American pop music. Phil Spector's impact on music is felt to this day. He was a brilliant artist, but he was a horrible human being even before he became a convicted murderer. Okay.
Seth, wait a second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Before you go on, what did Stan Getz say about the music he was playing? What were his own thoughts about the sublime music he was producing?
Well, he definitely liked it. I mean, he definitely heard this bossa nova and said, that's something I can do. It's something that lent itself to his kind of more light, feathery tone. Stan Getz, I kind of glossed over this part, but Stan Getz is yet another musician in the tradition of what's known as cool jazz. That is the idea of jazz not as of aggressive and energetic, but as mellow and relaxed, laid back. And bossa nova certainly fits in nicely with that aesthetic. So bossa nova was an excellent fit for him, per se. Okay. A Girl from Ipanema was composed by Antonio Carlos Jobim, who was also on that album, and made famous by Stan Getz with Astrud Gilberto. Okay. Billie Holiday. There's a lot of pertinent comments, but I'm going to skip a lot of this for now. Yeah, Perry Como did have some great guests. I mean, most famously, Elvis, who one of his first television appearances was on Perry Como. All right. Oh, someone mentioned Larry King. That's a good connection. Yes. Stan said Jewish people liked his bossa nova because Jews like the mambo. That's a nice connection. That kind of does make sense. I haven't thought, oh yes, and the Mambonics is a great documentary. I've seen it. All about the mambo craze of the 1950s. Now, of course, the mambo has roots in Cuba, whereas the bossa nova has roots in Brazil, but there's certainly some common ancestry there. Yes, everyone okay, yes, Ron, I was going to mention, for those of you who are jazz fans, that indeed was a young Gary Burton on vibraphone. Good eye there, Ron. Okay. And those women did look a little old to be college girls, but, who knows? Yeah, and, Astrud Gilberto, I mean, you can kind of tell she wasn't a professional singer. She had a very unorthodox approach to vocals and stage presence. Again, motionless, expressionless, and that very kind of almost monotone, quiet voice. Now, it turned out to really hit the spot. I mean, there's a whole generation of singers who have imitated that style. But in 1964, that was a very unusual style of singing. Keter Betts played with Stan Getz. I've played with Keter Betts, actually, not long before he passed away. Did I misspell his name on the sheet? If I did, I did misspell his name on my notes. You're correct. Keter Betts is Keeter. That was purely a typo on my part. Great Washington, D.C. bassist, who I had the privilege of playing with a few times before his passing in, I think, 1999 maybe, or maybe 2000. Anyway, is the bossa nova rhythm related to the Bo Diddley rhythm? If you go back far enough, I mean, they all have kind of these African, Caribbean sort of roots. All right. Getz played with Coltrane. Yes, he did play with John Coltrane. Antonio Carlos Jobim did an album with Frank Sinatra. Indeed, he did. Okay, great. Moving on. The next person I want to talk about is one of the greatest drummers in the history of jazz, Mel Lewis. Some brief biography before I show you some video clips. Melvin Sokoloff. There are his dates: May 10th, 1929 to February 2nd, 1990. In New York, Russian Jewish parents. His father was a musician. And indeed, as a kid, young Melvin was being dragged around to gigs and playing Jewish music, but also playing American music, theater music, stuff like that. Well, when young Melvin was 6 years old, his father took him to hear Gene Krupa with Benny Goodman at the Armory in Buffalo. And that started a lifelong obsession. And Mel Lewis would actually become kind of almost a de facto protege of Gene Krupa, who would mentor him throughout his career and help get him gigs, and nicknamed him Red because of his little reddish hair. He landed him his first gig his first real gig with the Stan Getz Orchestra, again, out in California, 1954. Then he works with the Terry Gibbs Dream Band. He moves to New York, works with Jerry Mulligan. But his real significance is in 1966. He collaborates with a wonderful trumpet player named Thad Jones. Now, Thad Jones is one of the famous Jones brothers of jazz. There are three of them, all related. Oldest brother, Hank Jones, pianist. Youngest brother, Elvin Jones, who is the drummer for John Coltrane. Well, in the middle was Thad Jones, a trumpet player who had played with the Count Basie Band for many years. Well, in 1966, Thad Jones and Mel Lewis decided to put together their own big band that incorporated more modern influences from bebop, cool jazz, and rock and roll, jazz fusion, into the big band concept. Now, this band started kind of informally, but eventually they landed a steady gig starting in 1966, playing every Monday night at the Village Vanguard, which is still one of the leading jazz clubs of the world in Greenwich Village, New York. Now, they led this Thad Jones, Mel Lewis big band from 1966 until 12 years later, when Thad Jones moves to Denmark in the dead of night. That's a whole nother story. Then it becomes Mel Lewis and the Jazz Orchestra. And then after Mel Lewis passes away in 1990, it becomes the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra. So this same band, with obvious changes in lineup, has basically run continuously from its founding in 1966 up until, you guessed it, March of 2020. The coronavirus pandemic is the first thing to put a cease in these Monday night big band performances at the Village Vanguard. But hopefully it'll pick up again in a few months when things get back to normal. And you can go to the Village Vanguard any Monday night, any time of the year, and see the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra, this big band founded by Mel Lewis and Thad Jones in 1966. Indeed, there are still people who play in the band today who played with Thad Jones and Mel Lewis back then. All right, I want to show you a quick clip. I'm going to show you a drum solo of Mel Lewis, incredible drummer, from a 1974 performance of the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Orchestra at the Kongsberg Jazz Festival in Norway. Now, a couple of things about this. First of all, you'll see that Mel Lewis was an incredible drummer. He was also an interesting personality. He was kind of a schlubby guy. In fact, Terry Gibbs nicknamed him Mel the Tailor because he reminded him of an old Jewish tailor. And you can kind of get a sense of that here from this. The kind of guy that if you ran into him in the street, you would think was one of the hippest jazz drummers in the world. Nonetheless, he was. Another thing I want to mention about this clip is on baritone saxophone, a big saxophone. You will see a wonderful saxophonist named Ed Hickes. And I only mention Ed Hickes because he was my original saxophone instructor. He's still alive, still plays, lives up in New York. Played in the Vanguard Orchestra up until just a few years ago. Anyway, let me get this queued up for you, and I'll show you just an excerpt of this. I want to show you another brief clip of the Mel Lewis big band in 1980 in Jerusalem. Is that correct year? I'm sorry, 1985. I'm just going to show you a little bit of this. This is the Mel Lewis big band in Jerusalem in 1985. Come on. Oh, there we go. All right. The last person I want to talk about here today is somewhat different than either Stan Getz or Mel Lewis in the fact that he is still alive. And shame on me for not updating my notes. He turned 96 in October. He is now well 96 years old. I'm talking about Terry Gibbs, born in 1924, Julius Herbert Gubenko. And he doesn't play anymore. He stopped playing a few years ago, but he is still in good health and still as sharp as a tack. I know this because I happen to be Facebook friends with Terry Gibbs. And really, there's no closer form of friendship, as you well know, than being Facebook friends. And he's on there all the time, sharp as a tack. Anyway, Terry Gibbs, Julius Herbert Gubenko, actually has roots in Jewish music. He's born in the Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn, and his father, Abe Gubenko, played violin and led a band, Abe Gubenko and his Radio Novelty Orchestra. Now, they played American music, but they also played a lot of Jewish music, a lot of klezmer. And as a kid, Terry Gibbs rubbed elbows with Naftali Brandwein, Dave Tarras, a lot of the towering giants of the golden era of klezmer in New York and in the Catskills. He's very much a child prodigy. His first instrument is the drums, and which he learns from his older brother. And then in 12, with the vibraphone, with the xylophone actually, he wins the Major Bowes Amateur Hour Contest. That's a big deal. You might have heard of Major Bowes Amateur Hour Contest. It's like America's Got Talent for its time. It's a big deal to win it. It starts him as a child star. He takes the stage name of Terry Gibbs from Julius Gubenko. He decided he wanted to be Terry after his famous favorite boxer, Terry Young. So he became Terry Gubenko, and then he worked for a band leader of some renown named Judy Kane. And Judy Kane decided that Gubenko was too awkward a name and just decided to change it to Gibbs, and thus he became known as Terry Gibbs. He actually got a full scholarship to study classical percussion at Juilliard, but he turned it down because he had fallen in love with this new style of music that had taken Midtown Manhattan by storm called Bebop in the post-World War years. And he really became the first person to adapt bebop, this new virtuosic style of jazz, pioneered by people like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious Monk, adapt it to the vibraphone and the xylophone. I want to show you a clip right now from early in Terry Gibbs's career. That's just, it's remarkable for a whole host of reasons. All right, this clip is from The Tonight Show in 1956. And it's a medley of two songs, an original composition by Terry Gibbs called Gibberish, and then a bebop classic by Charlie Parker, called Now's the Time. And this video is noteworthy for a lot of reasons. First of all, it'll give you a taste of Terry Gibbs' talent. And Terry Gibbs was obviously a very talented vibraphonist. Like I said, he's the first to really adapt bebop to the vibraphone. He's also someone who's always a showman. You know, you can take the boy out of the Catskills. You can't take the Catskills out of the boy. And Terry Gibbs, throughout his career as a musician and a band leader, would be an entertainer as well as just a musician. And you get a glimpse of that here. The other thing that is remarkable about this clip, and something that really literally blew my mind, literally, pieces of my mind were all over the room when I first saw it, is this clip also features a woman who Terry Gibbs featured in his band this time named Terry Pollard. Now, Terry Pollard is remarkable for a lot of reasons. She is a black woman in a white band. Now, integrated bands were not unheard of in 1956. There were other integrated bands out there, but it's pretty unusual. And to have a black female instrumentalist in the band was taking it to another level. Beyond that, as you well know, jazz to this day has a tremendous amount of gender disparity. And there are more great female jazz musicians than ever before, but it's nowhere near 50%. And back in this time period, there were very few, just a handful of female jazz instrumentalists. Vocalists, yes, but instrumentalists, there's only a handful. Mary Lou Williams, Marion McPartland, Vidalia Snow, a few others. And Terry Pollard is one of them. The other thing that's amazing is I had never heard of her, because apparently in the late 50s, she basically retired to Chicago and only worked as a musician and a music teacher part-time. She's incredible in this video. She starts on piano and, by the way, plays some excellent bebop piano at a time, mind you, in the mid-50s when not many pianists could play in the bebop style. And then she takes over the vibes from Terry Gibbs and plays the heck out of the vibraphone as well. By the way, notice that when she takes over the vibes from Terry Gibbs, they get a substitute pianist. The substitute pianist is none other than the host of The Tonight Show, Steve Allen. He takes over her piano seat when she gets up to the vibes. This is an incredible clip. It's incredible because of Terry Gibbs. It's incredible because of Terry Pollard. It's not that noteworthy because of Steve Allen. He's kind of a mediocre pianist. Anyway, let me show this to you. Hopefully this will wow you as much as it wowed me. Okay, if you're wearing socks, I guarantee they are now across the room. I mean, apart from the incredible musicianship on display and the incredible showmanship on display, but having, you know, a Jewish man and a black woman share the spotlight, aggressively pushing each other out of the way in a playful manner, in that is really quite extraordinary for 1956. All right, I know we're running out of time. I want to show you one more quick thing before we go on Terry Gibbs, before I answer questions about Terry Gibbs. Here is a video of his last performance, supposedly doesn't play anymore. This is just about 5 years ago in his home, jamming with friends, filmed by his son-in-law, or daughter-in-law, I believe. He's 91 years old here. 91 years old. Whoops, and I have the wrong clip queued up. Give me a second. All right, here we go.
All right, 1, 2, F4.
That's his son. apologize for cutting this short. Look, all this music is easily accessible on the worldwide interwebs. Go seek it out. I guarantee you, you'll be richly rewarded for doing so. Of course, in a purely spiritual sense, not financially speaking. Let me just say a few things before I do final questions and scroll through the group chat. First of all, I want to thank you. I know it's a Wednesday night. I really appreciate you taking time to hang out with me on Zoom. In this pandemic time, it means the world to me to have this kind of connection, and I love seeing your smiling faces. A big thanks to the Jewish Studies Center for having me, and I don't know everyone's name. I apologize. Of course, I know Jerry Garfinkel and Mindy Reiser and Victoria Kay and Roz, who's here somewhere. Thank you so much for sponsoring me and bringing me in to do this program. Now look for me around. Obviously, I'm not performing anywhere in public these days, but someday I will. And I'm also doing a fair amount of virtual activities. The best way to find out more about me and my albums and my recordings, I have Jewish CDs, jazz ones, go to sethkibel.com. Shockingly enough, that domain name was not taken. But I'm also on, I'm also on all the various social media networks and music services, Facebook, Twitter. I'm on the InstaTweet, the Facegram, the UChat, all that stuff. One of the nice things about having a slightly unusual name is that you can go anywhere, type in my name, you'll find me. Google, you'll find me. YouTube, you'll find my videos right away. Spotify, you'll find my albums. Apple Music, Amazon, whatever. I'm very easy to track down. There's only one other Seth Kibel in the world. Ottawa. Please don't bother him. He's probably stealing all of my gigs. All right. Having said that, let me just see if there are other things in the chat, and then we'll see if we can do any other final questions. Okay. Oh, man, there's so much here. Okay, yeah, the album that you're talking about in 2017, Terry Gibbs, 92 years young, jamming at the Gibbs house, I believe is audio from that video that I just showed you. Let's see. Oh man, there's so many things here. All right, here we go. All right, Kira. Oh, I love all the people who saw. See, I didn't see a lot of these musicians live that we've talked about. So I'm jealous. Okay. Mel is dressed far less schlubby in Jerusalem. That's true. That's true. He was. Never heard of Terry Pollard, you know, and I should do a deep dive into her because find out why she got out of music. I mean, was it because of sexism/racism or something like that? Were there other reasons? Because she was just an incredible talent. I mean, that video alone, just like I said, knocks my socks off. Does Bebop have any Jewish roots? Roz says. Not directly. I mean, you know, you can probably draw a line to anything, but all the earliest beboppers and the pioneers of bebop music were all African American. I mean, the early pioneers of bebop were Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, Thelonious Monk, Kenny Clark, Charlie Christian. So there really are not any tangible Jewish roots in bebop. There were some great Jewish bebop players, Terry Gibbs being a great example of that. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Vibe Battle, never seen. Is there a link for this? Oh, someone put the link in. Steve Allen. What was Steve Allen's original name? I should know that. Okay, I hope Mel Lewis and Terry Gibbs were more stable and more together than Stan Getz. Yeah, they were. Now, Mel Lewis was famously an ornery fellow. There are lots of great stories about him being kind of just an ornery, you know, kind of disgruntled sort of guy. There are some great interviews where he just kind of complains about other drummers and other musicians. But none of them had the kind of personal vices that Stan Getz did. And Terry Gibbs, by all accounts, is one of the nicest guys in the world. Okay. Salt Peanuts, of course, is a classic bebop tune as well. Yes, I love the dog in that video with Terry Gibbs. That dog, obviously for that dog, great jazz being made in his house is nothing out of the ordinary. It's just another day that ends in Y for that pooch, for that golden retriever. Okay. Thank you for all the compliments. I love compliments.
All right. Well, while you're searching, Seth,
Yes.
I have to ask a question you may not know the answer to. What Jewish connection, beyond sometimes the music, did the musicians have? Was there any particular interest in attending services, Israel beyond touring, any particular effort to make links with other religious traditions?
You know, it's interesting. It varied. I mean, musicians, jazz musicians, generally speaking, there are exceptions, are a fairly a-religious lot. A lot of these musicians certainly identified as Jewish culturally. And they often engaged in Jewish music. I mean, Terry Gibbs did a great album that I didn't even get a chance to talk about here, but I'll at least show you what it looks like, called Jewish Melodies in Jazz Time.
Oh my God.
This album, by the way, check it out. He did it in 1963. It's the premiere recording of Alice McLeod, who would soon be Alice Coltrane, John Coltrane's future wife. She's on piano. And this album was actually produced by Quincy Jones. So it's Quincy Jones producing Terry Gibbs doing Jewish music in a jazz form. What else was I going to say? Another person who I didn't get to talk about was Willie the Lion Smith. Willie the Lion Smith was a black stride pianist who always self-identified as Jewish. Now, he had a biological Jewish father who was absent from his childhood, and then he was raised in a Jewish neighborhood and was kind of informally adopted by a local Jewish family who actually let him do a joint bar mitzvah with their son. So Willie the Lion Smith, in fact, real quickly, let me show you a couple of things real quick about Willie the Lion Smith. Let's see. Oh, there's the business card. Here's Willie the Lion Smith's business card. There it is. Willie the Lion Smith, modern piano teaching, swing, mic training, voice coaching. Let me give you another treat. This is about a minute long. This is Willie the Lion Smith, a black jazz stride pianist singing in Yiddish. Oh, my Zoom Techniques falls after 9 p.m.
Duke and them, when they first come with the band, they was working down in Bernstein's downtown. So in Jewish, we say knock a bissel, knock, knock. So I taught this to Duke. Knock a bissel, knock, knock, knock. Ich hab a bissel, knock, knock, knock. Give a bissel, always mehr, give a stickle, always mehr. Knock a bissel, knock, knock, knock. Ich hab a bissel, knock, knock, knock. Always give a bissel, knock, knock, knock. Ich hab gar nicht da, sie gehen, komm ne Schäne, mach a Mäuze, nach a bissel, knock, knock, knock. Give a stickle.
Look, Harlem and the Lower East Side of Manhattan weren't that far apart. Is someone... Stop it. Uh-oh. All right, sorry, hold on one second. Oh, my goodness. Okay, let me stop that. All right. Harlem and the Lower East Side of Manhattan weren't that far removed. And as someone pointed out in the comments, no less a personage than Cab Calloway recorded songs in Yiddish early in his career. He did a kind of version of the song Otazoy, a klezmer standard. All right. What else is in here? Okay. Night in Tunisia. Now that's interesting. The melody in Night in Tunisia is Jewish. You know, it's funny. I've actually done kind of klezmery versions of Night in Tunisia. And I think what you're hearing there is a common Middle Eastern ancestry. Night in Tunisia is written by Dizzy Gillespie, definitely has that non-Western sound. And I think Dizzy was getting that from kind of Arabic music, but there's obviously obviously common ancestry. I mean, you know, I sometimes joke it's a slight oversimplification, but you can get klezmer by taking Middle Eastern sounds, scales which appear in Arabic music as well as Jewish music, and superimposing them over non-Jewish Eastern European dance rhythms. There you have it, klezmer. Slight oversimplification, but not that completely inaccurate. I was gonna say something else, and it fell out of my brain. I don't know. Anything else?
Okay, let me throw in something else. You talked a little about the propinquity of Harlem and the Jewish community. Any other responses from Black musicians to the Jewish jazz musicians and their role in the larger jazz world?
Sure. I mean, you know, let me try to think. But you know, someone mentioned in the comments Red Rodney, who is a Jewish trumpet player who played with Charlie Parker, who played bebop, but famously, when Charlie Parker was down on his luck, brought Charlie Parker up to the Catskills and had him play some Jewish events. There's a famous scene in the movie Bird, the biopic about Charlie Parker that was directed by Clint Eastwood, that shows Charlie Parker, played by Forrest Whitaker, playing at a bar mitzvah. That's not untrue. That is a true story. Look, musicians like to work. You're a professional musician and you like to eat, it behooves you to eat. So there are a fair number of stories of both Jewish musicians working with Black musicians and vice versa, playing each other's music. And that brings me to the other things I wanted to say. I always like to say, and maybe I even mentioned this 2 weeks ago, that if musicians ran the world, there'd be no wars. Now, nothing would ever get done, but there'd be no wars. So on the whole, that's a net gain. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Jerry and Mindy. And thank you, everyone else. And I hope to see people both virtually and in person in the not too distant future.
Okay. Before we tune out, please remember the Study Center with any donations you would like to make. We want to thank you for hanging in with us for at least an hour and a half. And Seth, of course, but for more of these programs, the Jewish Study Center would welcome whatever you wish to send our way. Jerry?
Let me make two quick comments. One, that C-Down's real name is Stephen Valentine Patrick William Allen. So C-Down is really his real name. I don't know yet what the outcome will be of the first recording, but I'll send you an email. I'm going to try to send an email with some of the references that were in the chat or weren't in the chat, so you can look up some music later on. And also, we do have some good programs coming up. I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily better than Seth, but there's still some good programs coming up. About a month from now, on February 24th in the evening, we're going to have our annual Latka Hamantaschen debate, which is a nice, scholarly, but very fun debate. And then the week after that, on March 3rd, we're going to have something called Return to the Catskills. Catskills were mentioned a few times by Seth, and Phil Brown, who I consider the most worldwide expert on the Catskills, will be giving that talk. I'm from the Catskills also. Take the boy out of the Catskills. I'm taken out of the Catskills. I grew up there. My parents had a resort hotel. Sometime in between now and the Hamantaschen debate, we may have some classes on Latin American Jewish culture. We will have it next few weeks. I'm not sure exactly which week. And so I'd like to also, I'd like to thank very much, of course, Seth. I mean, that was just a great presentation. And afterwards, I think we'll get together with Seth and we'll make up some of these references to send to you. And I also like to thank Mindy, Ringy Reiser, and Victoria Kay for helping in being the tech drummer. And I also thank all of you. There are over 200 people who attended this. So we really appreciate having a great audience and great comments and questions in the chat. So we'll see you in a few weeks in the next class. And you will also be receiving, besides the email about what's happening with the references, you will also be put on our email listing. And once a week, we'll send you an email on what's next in our repertoire. So thank you, everyone. And happy Tu B'Shvat, which is tonight.
Laila Tov.